Sachin, we're so excited to have you. It's Startup Grind, calling in all the way from London. Welcome, and this is right at the beginning of our summit. So excited to have you.
Thank you so much, sir, for having me here. I'm actually also in London today, which I wasn't meant to be, but I hope to catch up next time in person.
Amazing. So let's dive in. Builder.ai has been using AI really since the company was started. How would you characterize where we are in sort of AI hype cycle? Where are we on the curve, and what's unique about the moment right now?
Look, I think when we think about sort of parallels to this, right? I always feel like that it's important because it helps us position our mind correctly. There was that moment in time I remember growing up when AOL launched the disk,
Hmm.
and then everyone said the internet's here, and actually the internet had been here for about 30 years prior. Or we had that moment where Rail Player launched the ability for you to watch videos in a browser. And we're like, that's it, everyone's toast, we're going to watch videos, and then you'd hit play and wait 30 minutes to get a 30-second grainy clip. And that's kind of like where we are today, probably a little bit ahead in terms of that sort of wider AI landscape. And why is that important? I think it's important for a number of reasons. One, we've got this confusion between generative AI and AI, and one seems to lead the other, or vice versa. And really, fundamentally, it's just software,
Hmm.
and it's software that behaves differently depending on what the use case you're trying to drive. We still really haven't got to a place where it's multidisciplinary. And Derek, why is that important? Because if you think about how a human mind thinks, imagine that video of you playing tennis as a kid or swimming as a kid. You see the video. Well, that's a knowledge graph. You're retrieving an existing video. You're not generating it. If I said, "Could you help me complete my sentence?" What do you think I'm going to? The word you're probably thinking about is say or do, right? Out of the millions of words that I could have used, and
Yeah.
that's inference or a graph neural network. And then finally you've got let's generate a poem about startup grind, and where the known entities and our LinkedIn profiles are the RAG, and it creates something. Like then you're in sort of like this element of generative, but we've sort of got the whole thing quite juxtaposition. And I think a part of what has driven that, and I argue is, and then I'll shut up, is the most important innovation in the last 3 years,
Hmm.
is that we finally realized that human beings want to use software through conversation, which is what made this so relatable, because conversation was a medium reserved for humans to talk to humans. And now you had a parrot to a human pretending to talk like a human, and suddenly everybody went visceral. But
Hmm.
at the moment, it can only do a 5-year-old's math as of last week. So we're really quite far away still.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective to sort of talk about the history of the internet and how these things have been happening maybe long before people started talking about them. I I sort of infer from that that if I'm just getting my startup going, or if I'm in the early innings of getting it, that maybe you feel I'm and it's an AI focused product or service, that maybe I'm not too late. Is that?
You're definitely not too late. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you a couple of really crystal examples. So when we go back 10 years and people wanted to do video streaming, the argument was, or gaming streaming or anything else, was like, oh my God, we're going to need like 1,000 meg or gigabit connection to every home to be able to do this. And then H.264 came along, and suddenly you can stream 4K in 2 Mbps or 3 Mbps. And we're going to go through such massive evolutions of the tech stack. What everyone's investing in today, for example, in the language models or the frontier models, that's all going to get commoditized really fast.
Hmm.
And actually, you will see these very technologies go through a rebirthing probably in the next 18 months, much faster than the previous cycles. Uh, and I think that's also where I think the real power of multidisciplinary sitting in the application space is going to become really, really powerful. So I don't think it's late. I do think if you're going to build like another language model and you don't have a couple of $100 million to spare, then you're going to have to find innovative ways to train and get access to GPU time. which seems to be sort of like the cotton to get over at the point.
I have tons of questions. I also see that the chat and the Q&A is filling up with questions. But before I get into that, I wanted to just start with something really exciting that's getting announced today. I wonder if you could tell us about Dream Builder 25 and what it is and how it works and how people, the 1,000 plus people that are here, how they can get involved.
Look, so if I go back to the foundations of why we built Builder, as Simon Sinek always says, the infinite vision. The infinite vision was we're here to help people unlock their potential, unlock their dreams, unlock the thing that they want to do and the thing that they want to become. Inadvertently, it started off with software. It's now software and AI. And so we've been thinking a lot around how do we help people, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs build software, build technology, build applications without being shackled like they were in the past. And so if you ask anyone at Builder, the heart and soul of the company is around the entrepreneur. And how do we allow the entrepreneur to be able to do things that they couldn't do before? And Dream Builder 25 is really an emphasis of exactly this thesis. Right? We've done everything from an App Olympics for in the UAE for Sheikh Hamdan. We've done sort of similar programs for other venture studios, but this is the biggest one we've done in the partnership where we're saying we really want to help in the month of AI month. We want to kick off, we want to power the entrepreneurs that are a part of Startup Grind to be able to be creative, to be able to unleash their real potential and build software, and without having to worry about what it takes to actually get it done.
It's amazing, and it harkens back to 15 or so years ago when I quit my job to become an entrepreneur, and just sort of feeling almost like lost and not knowing where to go next. And I think Builder, as I've used the product and as I've used it as a way to really get some of those ideas out of my head and to start get it started. I think it's an incredible opportunity with Dream Builder to to really speed up my development and to really take it to the next level as quickly as humanly possible. So we're really excited to be doing this together, and I think it's just going to be such a huge thing for entrepreneurs. And I think people in the United States, people around the world, they can apply to this. Is that right?
Yes, globally applicable. I think we really kick it off at the beginning of December this year with you guys, but we're going to have submissions between now, or I guess the 1st of October and December, and then the plan is really to run this into the actual summit that you guys are hosting in April next year. And what's exciting to me is, look, there'll always be one winner. But in this situation, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of dreams being unlocked.
Hmm.
And that to me is like the real winning moment.
Amazing. Um, let's let's shift gears and talk a little bit about what other opportunities that you see in the years ahead. And we kind of talked about this still being very early innings of AI and just the beginning. Um, what are some of the exciting potential applications of AI that you see?
Look, I think that that's a really interesting one, and I would probably maybe, if I can, extend the question a little bit, which is, what are the excitement and the risks
Hmm.
associated with that excitement? Because I think the risks in themselves open up really exciting points. So I think the first is where this generation, my generation, and maybe the ones just coming out of college now, or maybe that came out of college in the last few years, we have this really unique vantage point. We saw dial-up to broadband to no AI to traditional AI to AI. In fact, I'd say we saw the full spectrum. When I was in school, I was a tester for British Telecom for ADSL, and I went from dial-up V90 with lots of noises to 10 megs coming into my house, and it felt like the world had changed. And we've got a generation now that's going from having to have learn how to use PowerPoint, learn how to use Photoshop, learn how to do XYZ to show skills, to just asking and it gets done, at least to a bare bones extent. And so that is really exciting and also challenging, because the next generation, it was all going to be there. And so how do you stop that generation being neuro lazy? And I'm really both perplexed and excited by this concept of, in a world where people can just get stuff done and they just have to be creative, how do you avoid neuro laziness? Because sometimes it's the act of doing the hard, boring, mundane work that drives you actually to be more creative, to be to sort of be more forward thinking. So I think that's one area. And the second area is going to be, if we consider data is not a commodity, but data is oxygen. How are we going to see people build applications around this new oxygen? How are we going to see permissioning of the data? How are we going to make sure that, and this is something to me that's really close to my heart, is that our version of history is always our version of history. Right? And we know that history has multiple versions of the truth, or multiple versions of truth make up history, right? Depending on who you ask. It's beauty in the eyes of the beholder. And I think that's going to be a really interesting both engineering and an application problem, because if I'm teaching, dare I say, American independence to a kid in London versus American independence to a kid in New York, they'll fundamentally be told a different variant of what happened, just because that's ultimately what makes up your sovereignty. So I think that is super exciting. And then if we go fast forward, I give you a case study of something that, to me, we're actually in the realm of making possible. So I wear an Aura ring. And imagine, God forbid it doesn't happen to me, but imagine there was an irregular heartbeat at 3 a.m. In today's world, at Steve's story, probably don't notice it, and by the time it's a real issue, it might be a decade down, God knows. Now imagine in the new world, it sees that, compares it against all my schematics, compares it against my data points, compares it against my medical record while I'm sleeping, decides, actually I'm going to book you a doctor's appointment, books a doctor's appointment, moves my other appointments, puts half a caffeine of coffee, right? So less caffeine than normal because it's heart related, doesn't want to, puts soft music, books my Uber, basically has done all of this and then put really soft music as I'm waking up to say, hey, listen, I just need you to get in this Uber and go see the doctor. Nothing really that urgent. Today, that doesn't happen. That requires a bunch of human beings to make a bunch of decisions, to make a bunch of movements, and even then at best you're 2 weeks out. And so you're starting to see this potential where we're creating application spaces that just didn't exist before, because you didn't have the way to connect multiple varying data points to achieve a result and then plug into all these systems that we've been building up till now.
I was in a customer meeting yesterday on a sales call, and one of the first questions that they asked when talking about AI and our product was around the fears that they had with it and the concerns that they had with it. And this is from large, important company, and I've heard this again and again from different companies. What are what are your thoughts around the fears and concerns that some people have around increasing adoption of AI, and what should founders and entrepreneurs be aware of as they tackle AI in their product?
So I'd say the brass tacks is it's crap in, crap out still. And that could just be from the simple use of a large language model or a GPT or a Claude or something else. I think the second is 90% of the actual adoption of generative AI has failed. It's not gone past POC. That tells you a lot. It's great doing the one presentation or the one document, but then when you have to give it in the hands of folks that don't know how to prompt engineer, don't know how to articulate a conversation, don't have the critical thinking. I give you an example. We're writing these deep dive documents because we go through this planning session, and I know who's written it on an AI versus who's written it by hard work of just writing the documents out, because you can see the texture and the quality of the document that's being written. And so I think that's a really important piece. But to your point around the fear, the real reason we're seeing this visceral reaction, we've been seeing it now for 2 years, is because the UI format is relatable. And so people freaked out because it was relatable, felt human, sounded human, all the vernacular we're using, like hallucinations, not really hallucination, it's a confabulation, it's very different. we try to make it sound like we say it thinks, but it doesn't think. It's just a parrot. It predicts the next word. And because we're using all of these human words continuously, we're basically frightening people. And then what happens is they start using it, and it doesn't, it can't tell, it can't produce anything without error in it, because it's just predicting the next word. And so, a part of what I think is important for the founders is figure out the right way of articulating the message to your first customer, to your 10th customer, to your 100th customer. And don't start with we're an AI company. Start with, we're helping you solve this problem. We're going to remove human work, or human tasks, or we're going to remove human variability. Oh, and by the way, we're going to use like a composite stack of AI to achieve this. Right? And I think that's a very different approach, and you're starting with the problem itself.
What do you've raised a lot of funding during this AI boom and have done an incredible job navigating that to help fuel the business. Walk us through your thought process when you plan to raise funding. Do you have sort of any key things that in your mind that the product and the business has to hit before you even start spending time doing that? What are key things that you've seen VCs look for when looking for an AI powered startup?
So look, I'd say the one thing is once you start raising, you never stop raising. I think you get the 6 weeks after the round or the 8 weeks after the round, and you basically start the process all over again. And there's a specific reason for this. If you raise when you need to raise, it's usually too late. And you have no room for course correction. Second thing is, when you start speaking to people before you're actually in the mid-swing of raise, you also know which way the wind is moving. What are things that are important to folks? You control the time and the narrative and the speed. Whereas if you need to raise because you got 3 months of cash left or what have you, you're now no longer controlling your own narrative. Someone else is controlling your path, right? Indirectly or directly. It's really important when you go from seed to A to B that you're able to demonstrate fundamental shifts in your trajectory, right? So I'd say no one should be asking you for revenue in seed. You should really be saying, can I build great product? A version 1. And I would even say, if you're building something really transformatory, you're either going to have a giant seed round or you're going to have a seed and A in really quick succession. But you've got to find the folks that match the velocity and the direction of travel you have. Like, so if you are building something that's going to take 4 or 5 years to build because it's really evolutionary or revolutionary and it's fundamentally different, raising money from someone that basically wants out in 3 years is a highly problematic endeavor, right? The alignment between the investor and you from a timeline perspective, how they think about risk. The classic mistake a lot of us make is we oversell. I almost think you undersell. That makes a much harder job in the upfront work. You're not going to get 50 term sheets, but you're also not going to have an issue, which we've seen in 24 and 23, is companies having their valuations written down. Builder's never had its valuation written down. It's only been in the worst climate possible, the valuation was still 80% higher, right, or 85% higher. And it's because we never optimized for the things that were in the moment. We optimized for things where, we need to make some changes next quarter. Who around the board is going to be willing to sit there and make those changes with us?
I know, communicating this effectively to investors is just incredibly difficult. And these are people that are hearing these pitches all day long, every day, all day. What kind of advice do you have on communicating your message? I mean, you've sort of laid out this really incredible vision for what you're doing and why you're doing it, and how the internet and communication has evolved to where we are today, to where a product like Builder becomes really important. But if I'm at the earliest stage, like what would you tell someone in trying to figure out how to communicate their message properly?
Look, I think the first thing is there's never a bad conversation. It's only bad if you don't learn from it. I think the second thing is you should have the confidence to speak your mind. The more you pander to the other person's view of the world, the worse you are. It's just better to say we don't agree. It's fine. Like, I start a bunch of meetings now saying we're not a SaaS company. If you want a SaaS company, like, let's not waste your time or my time. We should just move on. But here's why we're different, better, and more organized. I think the third is you got to have your problem down. If there is no energy and charisma in how you're articulating your problem, you'll lose people, especially at the earlier stages. You know, fundamentally, like you said, people are meeting 20, 30, 40 people a day, or they're probably receiving hundreds, maybe even high hundreds of pitches a day in their inboxes. You've got to stand out. And that standout's got to be a part of how you have that first conversation, how you get introduced, how you break through the, rigmarole of their day to day. How do you show up in their inbox? Or how did you show out of their inbox? Right? I mean, you've got to be creative. And I'd say the other part, which I think is really important, is you have 20 minutes. Really, you have 3 minutes in the beginning, and then you have another 17-minute extension. You've got to land the punch in 3 minutes. If you can't confidently, energetically, compassionately land the punch in 3 minutes, that's what you first need to solve.
That's really great advice. And I've sat in those meetings where, you know, you knew that you didn't land the punch. And I've sat in somewhere where I did land the punch, but you know, right? They start looking at their phone, they kind of glaze over, and they're painful, but I think you said it really eloquently of that it's still an opportunity to learn. Um, and not just be mad at them for, you know, their lack of interest, but why didn't I hook, line, and sinker get them in and get them excited? What did I do? What could I do differently? How could I improve? Um,
Well, and then the other one, Derek, which I think is important is, so I'm a huge tennis player, and the thing that matters is your input, not your output.
hmm,
And if the input mentality you have in the meeting is the only thing I can control is what I control, I can't control the outcome. So
yeah.
why am I going to this meeting? I'm going to this meeting because I'm going to try and learn something. What am I going to learn? I'm going to learn what this investor thinks. I'm going to learn what do they think about the world. I'm going to learn how smart they are or not smart they are. I'm going to learn what are the things they've invested in. So if you make it like I'm going to get the investor to participate and pitch to me as well in this discussion, why should I have the second meeting? You change it. It's a dating game. Remember that. So you've
Hmm.
got to make people do work. If you tell them everything, lay everything out, they don't have to do any work in the meeting. They don't have to present the best version of themselves. You shot yourself in the foot because there's this really interesting psychological concept called cognitive dissonance, which
Hmm.
is the more public statements I get you to make about why you like my thesis, why you like my idea, why you like the company,
Hmm.
the more likely you're going to go to the next step because you've created inertia. You've effectively got inertia. You got motion, sorry, reverse of inertia. You got motion.
That's really interesting. I think too, like with investors, you know, oftentimes they, you know, you have this hypothesis as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and you project that hypothesis and you share that, and you know, the investors can say whether they agree or disagree based off their own experience. But the thing that they can't um, disagree with is customer feedback. And Steve Blank famously said, you know, you've got to get out of the building, and that no business plan survives first contact with customers.
Correct.
And the more you can, anytime, that's what I always felt like meeting with investors. Anytime they were like, no, I'm not sure that's going to work, or this kind of falls apart because of this. And I could always reply with, well, that's not what Atlassian, who's my customer, said. That's not what Salesforce, my other customer, said. That's not what this person said. And I think to your point of like, and maybe I didn't do as well in this way, but bringing them along with you, having them reinforce, finding what they're saying, some truth in it, and bringing it out so that they, you know, they feel like, oh yeah, actually, that now does make sense to me, and having them say it.
Mirroring, by the way, Derek, is the most famous psychological technique you can use in any meeting,
What is
whether it's
that?
sales. So effectively, you pose a question,
Yeah.
but you know the answer can only be an affirmative of what you're about to land. Because what happens is you make them say something which is either you're going to be really punchy, you're going to make them say the wrong answer, and then you push back. I don't recommend that should be the first one because you basically want to build trust. And so what you end up doing is you ask a question where the obvious answer is the two or three fingerprints, say the breadcrumbs you're leaving for them to catch up. And then you land your first message. Then you do a bit more mirroring, you land your second message. And then actually, just to break the pattern up a little bit, is you land them on a message like, well, I want you to think about that for a second. What about X, Y, Z? Have you looked at this? Or my customer said Y. And then that gets them to think a little bit more and then come back with I agree or disagree. But they're engaging. And the point is when they're engaging is when you have them.
Cynthia is asking a question here in the Q&A, and which kind of relates to this, which is, at what point do you first engage the investor? Like when do you get that conversation started?
I mean, when you have something to talk about, probably
Yeah,
for your seed round. Depends what stage you're at, right? But I mean, if you're raising your first round,
yeah,
I think you want to. I think you want to go. Look, you have this ability to raise cash without anything in hand, other than a
mhm,
vision and a slide deck. You should make use of that moment in time.
yes,
You have a second moment of time, which is from early product to first revenue. You should make use of that moment in time. But you're
yeah,
always meeting them. If you have a 9 day week, 2 to 3 days of your 9 day week should be talking and meeting investors at some point. Because what you're doing is you're building you're also building FOMO. You
yes.
start every meeting with I'm not raising right now. But I'd love to chat to you about X because now everybody's selling. And look, in the seed round, you're not likely to meet a partner. You're going to meet an associate. And so you want to effectively, you want to get to a partner meeting because that's when you really get people moving.
Yeah, I love how you describe that. You have these windows and you only have so many shots that you can take. So you've got to, or you should take every window that you have. And then at some point, the windows kind of close, right? You have these moments where the windows are, you can't really raise funding when the windows are closed and then they can open back up.
Yeah.
But I love how you describe that. There's another question here. This is sort of shifting gears a little bit, more about Builder.ai specifically. And uh, this founder asks, how is Builder making it easier for non-technical founders to build an MVP?
Look, I think the most important is we're moving away from worlds where you had to be a product manager, you had to be a developer, you had to write code, you had to manage infrastructure, you needed to know all the third party providers, all of that stuff. And we're simply saying, talk about what you want to do. Talk about the problem, talk about the journeys, talk about the features, talk about the business. And we can go from that conversation to journeys and features, and then we can go to customization, then we can go to design and code, and then we can go to production infrastructure and product applications. And really what we're saying is your preferred interface of choice is conversation. We're going to keep you at conversation.
In an on-demand world increasingly shaped by AI, what advice do you give to founders on balancing efficiency, automation, and the human element in their products?
Look, ultimately humans buy from humans, humans talk to humans.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out, like the way I look at this is the problem you're solving is either going to allow someone to live longer, have more free time, or make more money. It
Hmm.
really one of the three. I'm sure there's like a fourth or a fifth, but those are the three big reasons. And so you've got to figure out which is the human need you're helping them achieve. Um, and and then the second I think is, how do you do that in the most efficient way possible? Now, some things can only be done with AI, like that example I gave of the detection of the heart murmur and so on and so forth, and how I went through. Other things, you don't have to just throw AI into it for the sake of throwing into it because it's the next buzzy thing. I think the most important, what I'd say is, before you even think about the technology backend, is think about the technology front end, right? What is the design interface that your customer wants to use, and where will they maximize their outcome?
Okay, as we finish up, I want to just jump back to Dream Builder 25 and a question that we have in the chat around that, and that is what someone asking, what guidance do you have to offer a founder who is considering applying for it, and what's the pitch? Why should I as an entrepreneur jump into Dream Builder 25, and how is it going to help me?
Look, I think the point of dreaming is that it's got to be a big dream. Don't make a little dream. And I'd say less about builder, more about startup grind, is that I think you've got this really nice macro context of content, mentorship, learning, and then we just do this little bit of making a product live. Um, but to be successful at this, at least I know what we're after, is we want folks that are thinking about changing the world.
Mm,
You don't want folks that are thinking about changing the next 5 minutes.
amazing. I want to ask one last question here, and then we'll let you go. So grateful for your time. When I first used Builder.ai, it kind of opened my eyes to some things that were possible that I had never seen. And I think that's what great products do, and especially in the age of AI, it kind of expands what's possible. Who are the people that you follow or you listen to or you track that help you sort of see what's coming on the next horizon with AI? And I wonder if you could just share, or if there are particular books or blogs or authors or anything that could help us to kind of get into your shoes a little bit if we want to be on the cutting edge of what's coming.
So look, the problem with reading what's coming out from any of the vendors or technology companies, even like us, is by the time it's out, it's no longer cutting edge,
Yeah.
normal edge, or it's the front of normal edge. And so you have to take a step back and say, what am I reading that's giving me an insight about how human behavior is changing? Like this whole thing of, when ChatGPT came out in November 22, the world went nuts saying AI is here, transform models are here. I'm like, no, computational conversation's been here for about 80 years. BERT's been here for about 9 years. The big change here is actually design, right? And then when you say, oh, that's interesting, it's design. Okay, so what part of design? And then you start unpacking and really thinking through it. The books that I found most useful in my entrepreneurial journey, there's been one is called Never Enough. It was by an ex-Navy SEAL who I've had a good opportunity to meet a couple of times. It was a White House fellow, was a CEO of VMware. Really, really good book. The second one was Robert Cialdini, The Psychology of Persuasion, which was also fascinating. The third one, which I think is a deeper read, but I think has had a huge impact how I think about the world, is Homo Sapiens by Yuval Harari. And these are not like the traditional, go fix your company books. And then the very last one, which probably had the most profound impact for me as an entrepreneur, as an individual, as an entrepreneur, was The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galway. And these three or four, there was another one, The Subtle Art of Never Giving an F, which is like The Psychology of Persuasion. They framed a lot of how I think about the relationships at work, the relationships between our brand and our customer. We had this discussion today where people were saying, oh, we must do discovery. I'm like, if we're going to go to the customer to do discovery, we're dead. We need to have enough intuition to know what we're testing for, and then the customer will tell us whether they like it. And that's a big difference, right? And so figuring out how you stay real, even when you become bigger, is actually the most important piece of this.
Amazing. Sachin, one rumor that started in the chat a little while ago that I want to just clear up is that neither one of us are AI. We are actually real humans.
That's correct.
These are not ChatGPT generated insights. These are
No,
from life experiences. So for those, thinking we're pulling a fast one here and vacationing in Bali somewhere, we're not. We're here live in the flesh, and so grateful to have you and to be working with Builder.ai on this really exciting opportunity for entrepreneurs to get involved and to get make their dreams happen. So thanks for being here, and everyone jump over to the breakout rooms. We have a bunch of amazing sessions coming up for the rest of the morning, so we'll see you over there.
amazing. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Derek.